Hello, my name is Katie. Welcome back to my channel. I am here today to do my September 2021 wrap-up. Now, this video was supposed to have gone up Friday, but the gods of video footage have not seen fit to bless me recently. So it's going up on a Tuesday, if this goes well. Fingers crossed. I'm going to scoot a little bit so I can put pictures up of the books that I've read because I already put all the books away. And most of them, to be honest, were either ebooks or audiobooks. Anyhow, so in September I read 14 books for a total of 5,527 pages. That is an average of 395 pages per book, which is not bad. The moods were mainly adventurous and reflective. I think the adventurous was because I was really needing like an escapism type of situation. Reflective, I don't know. As far as pacing goes, I had 3 that were slow, 8 that were medium, and 3 that were fast-paced, which is fairly standard for me. As far as page number goes, I was actually a little bit surprised by this. I had 2 that were under 300 pages, 10 that were between 300 and 499 pages, and then 2 that were 500 plus pages. I didn't think I had any books that were over 500 pages. Oh, actually, I guess I can think of one. I don't know, but that's really interesting. I only read 4 nonfiction and 10 fiction this month, which is a big difference from how August went, but that's okay. It's good to balance things out a little bit. And then the main genres here were historical and then fantasy. Historical because I always like books about history, and then fantasy because I really needed some escapism. So they do have a thing here on the story graph now where they're trying to track your format, whether it was digital or print. This is not accurate for me because A, I just realized this was here, and B, I can't always find something that says audio or ebook for the format on the story graph for the books. So I'm still kind of working that out a little bit. If you're curious though, I only had 3 physical books. Then I had 8 ebooks and 3 audiobooks. Out of my 14 reviews, I had an average star rating of 4.1, which is not half bad. That means I mostly enjoyed what I read. And then this chart is kind of cool. I'm still trying to figure out how this is going to work for me. Because I don't really update my reading every day. I might start trying to in October though, just so we can get a more accurate look here at how many pages I'm reading per day. But I thought it was kind of cool. Okay, so for this month I decided to just go in order of star rating. So I'm going to start with my 5 stars and then we'll roll it on down to 1 stars / books I didn't rate. I think there's only 1 book I didn't rate this month, and it was not anything to do with the book, but we'll get to that when we get there. So my 5 stars, first up I had Parable of the Talents by Octavia E. Butler. This is the sequel to Parable of the Sower. This whole book series was supposed to be longer than 2 books, but unfortunately Octavia Butler died before she could finish it, which is really sad because I am so greatly enjoying this book series. It is dystopian. It is incredibly depressing, like so very depressing. Anything that could happen that's bad does happen. In Parable of the Sower, we are more or less following the events that Lauren Olamina has written down in her journal. She's about a teenager, a young teen when that starts, and then by the end of that book she's an adult, and it's rough. In book 2, we get excerpts from Lauren Olamina's journal, but then we also get input from her child as well as writings from other people who were important in her life. So exceptionally good. A little too close to home in a lot of aspects, but just so well done. Octavia E. Butler has nailed everything I feel about the general population, the way religion affects things in our life. It's just masterful. The next book I rated 5 stars, actually this is not in the order I read them at all, but it doesn't matter. Betty by Tiffany McDaniel. Wow, this is another ridiculously depressing book, but so well written. This book made me feel things, and like there are parts of it that stick out in my head and I can't get rid of them. So this was a recommendation from a subscriber, and I believe it was actually recommended twice. I can't remember who exactly it was. If it was you, please let me know, because I want to say thank you, because this was an excellent book. It was funny though, because I did get a warning that it was like there's a scene of animal abuse in there. And I was reading it, and so many things that could be triggering were happening, like child abuse, rape, unbelievable. And I was like, but I got an abuse for, but I got a warning for animal abuse? But then that scene happened, okay? And that's the only thing that's in my head now. Like, I can't get that out of my head. So I totally understand why that's what popped to mind. Unreal. Like, I can't, it made me physically ill reading that. But, oh my god, like, the story itself is so well done. It's following Betty. Her father is Native American and her mother is white. And I believe she's growing up sometime around the 70s, and it's still, racism is still a problem, and people make fun of her. They don't seem to understand that she's not black, she's Native American. So a lot of the things they stereotype her with are like, they have nothing to do with her like where her people are from, and like the culture is ridiculous. Like the things that these kids are saying to her in school, and she's absolutely miserable. But her father is like her rock, and he keeps telling her that you can't let them win. And the wisdom and the advice and the stories he gives, they just really speak to his Native heritage, and I thought it was beautifully done. It was wonderful. It really was. So thank you again for the recommendation. My next 5-star, Mary Jane by Jessica Anya Blau. Oh man, I started this book at about 8 p.m. and I stayed up till around 2 a.m. to finish it because I was enjoying it so incredibly much. Mary Jane is just a coming-of-age story of our titular character, Mary Jane, and she's a teenager, and she has gotten a job as a nanny for the summer for this little girl. Her father is a doctor, so her parents are like, ooh, prestigious, this must be excellent. But what they don't realize is that he's actually a psychologist, and he is going to be working with a drug-addicted musician and his wife for the summer. So Mary Jane is exposed to all these things that have never entered her sphere at all. And watching her realize that the way she was raised is not the only way to be was just so beautiful. There were moments in here where they're singing. There's always music in this household. And to be clear, this is not how I was raised, okay? We did not have, like, she's introduced to marijuana, like, so many things, and that wasn't my experience at all. But we always did have music in our house. My mom and I used to sing together, my sister and I used to sing together, and so those parts where Mary Jane is just getting to sing with these people and experience the connection that you feel when you're harmonizing with somebody, I loved it. It was so good. The final 5-star read I had was The Huntress by Quinn. Oh man, Quinn, she's brilliant. She's probably my favorite historical fiction author at this point in time. I've read The Alice Network, The Rose Code, and now The Huntress, and I think I've given them all 5 stars. Wow. In this particular story, we're following a few people, but the one that sticks out to me the most is Nina. She is Russian, and she was part of a squad of night bombers in World War II. So they would take off at night, and they would bomb the Germans at night. And this is not something that women really got to do outside of Russia. But she's such a spitfire. She is sassy and she knows who she is and she's gonna take care of business, and I loved everything about her. And then we are also following a man called Ian. He was a journalist during the war, but now he finds he can't write anymore, and so he's dedicated himself to hunting down Nazis and bringing them to justice. And then in America, we're following Jordan. At the beginning of when we're introduced to her, she's 17, and then she grows up throughout the story. Her father was widowed when she was quite young, so it's just been her and her dad for years, and he meets this woman who was a refugee from Poland or Austria. I think she was Austrian, but she ran from Poland. Does that make sense? Anyway, and he ends up marrying her. She has a young daughter, and they're kind of getting to work as a family unit. And Nina was, by and large, my favorite character to follow, but I really loved watching all the storylines come together and merge, and I thought it was just beautifully done. Alright, moving into my 4.75 stars, I have a couple here. I have The Story of More, How We Got to Climate Change and Where to Go From Here by Jahren. This is the same author as Lab Girl, which is a book that's quite popular. I listened to it on audiobook a few months ago. Absolutely adored the book, adored the narration. Jahren narrates her own books, and I think that it's excellent. I love listening to her tell her stories. And this one is, you know, what it says in the title. It's about climate change, but it talks about how scientists have known about climate change for significantly longer than we thought. And she talks about how we got here, how this human drive to constantly have more and more and more has brought us to this point, and what do we do now that we're here? She gives some interesting advice as far as how to maybe help offset your carbon footprint a little bit. Just little things like how your hot water heater is the biggest energy drain. So if you can use cold water instead of hot water in your washing machine, you can offset a lot. Just little things like that. And it was so funny because a lot of her advice, I was sitting there listening and I was like, this is just stuff my parents have always done because they are a frugal people who don't need much in life. And it just kind of made me think that, you know, maybe people should be more like them. So kudos to you, Mom and Dad. You're doing it right. The other book I gave 4.75 stars to was The Reading List by Sara Nisha Adams. This was a recommendation from my mother. She told me that she thought it would really stand out when I read it, and it totally did. Oh my god. This was another story that's just beautifully told. It is basically about how stories can save your life, or pull you through really hard times. And we're following a few different characters, but the main theme is that they all find this list of books. It's the reading list for when you need it. And it's just watching them go through these changes as they're reading the books on this list. And some they enjoy and others they don't so much. But I thought it was so well done. I wasn't totally surprised by the ending. I'm not sure if you were really supposed to be, though. It was kind of one of those things where it was like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. But our two main characters in this book are Mukesh and Alicia. Mukesh is somewhere in his 80s. He's recently been widowed and he's just struggling. He feels like he's a burden on his children and they don't actually want to spend time with him. They feel like they have to spend time with him. He's having a lot of trouble connecting to his granddaughter the way his wife used to. And he finds this reading list and it just really changes his entire world. He finally is ready to come out of the house and be a part of the community again. He learns to connect with his granddaughter. It's so beautiful, like watching him grow and thrive, and he touched my soul. He was such a sweet character. And then Alicia is a teenager, and she's working at this library over the summer, and she's not really into reading. Her brother just suggested she get the job there, and so she did. But then she takes an adventure down this reading list as well, and it's so heartwarming watching these characters really become who they were meant to be as people, and I really enjoyed it. Next up, we have my 4-star reads. First is Madhouse at the End of the Earth, The Belgica's Journey into the Dark Antarctic Night by Julian Sancton. I read this as a recommendation from my father. If you remember in August, and I'll link that wrap up so you can go check it out if you want to, I read In the Kingdom of Ice. It was another like polar exploration story. Anyway, my dad read them both, and like quicker than I managed to. He really enjoyed them. But he read Madhouse at the End of the Earth first, and then read In the Kingdom of Ice, and he found he preferred Madhouse at the End of the Earth. I read them the opposite direction. I read In the Kingdom of Ice first, and then Madhouse at the End of the Earth, and he wanted to know if maybe it was just, if he had read the other one first, he would have enjoyed that one more, or what the deal was. I gave them both 4 stars, because I found them to be equal in terms of writing. The difference, in my opinion, as to whether you're going to get on with one more than the other is Madhouse at the End of the Earth puts you basically right into the action. There are very little extraneous details. You're basically, this is why the expedition came to be, and then you're on the expedition. And you're going through this journey with them. It does have excerpts from journals and things of that nature. But In the Kingdom of Ice has more like extraneous information about like the World's Fair and Thomas Edison and other things that were happening at the time. And then there's a huge chunk at the beginning just talking about the journey that led to this polar exploration being a thing. And I didn't quite need all that. But in that one, my emotional connection to the characters was so much greater. I had so many more feelings when things happened. That book nearly made me cry. Part of it, I think, is because we have letters that the captain wrote to his wife and his wife wrote to him. Now, obviously, they didn't end up actually exchanging most of these letters because there comes a point when you're traveling into the Arctic that you can't get mail anymore. So depending on what you like in books, if you want to be just straight into the action and have like just all the perilous adventure, that kind of thing, then I think Madhouse at the End of the Earth will work better for you. If you are more like me, where you kind of tend to prefer having a character connection, I think In the Kingdom of Ice will work better for you. But I ended up rating them the same because I found them both lacking in certain areas. So that's where I'm at with that. The other book I gave 4 stars to was The Seven Daughters of Eve, The Science That Reveals Our Genetic Ancestry by Bryan Sykes. This was really good. Oh man. This is very, well, I don't know, it is science heavy, but there's also enough human interest in it that I think it breaks up the science bits so that you're not overwhelmed, especially if you're not super familiar with biology. So the basic premise of this is Bryan Sykes has been working with mitochondrial DNA for years. I think this started in like the 70s for him. And he wanted to be able to prove that mitochondrial DNA, which is passed directly from mother to child, could in fact be a tool to trace ancestry. And a lot of his colleagues disagreed with him. And so he had a huge fight to actually prove that what he was looking at and what he was researching was not just worth researching, but true and helpful. So in this case, he was specifically targeting European ancestry because he lives in Europe. That's what he wanted to do. And just watching him go through these like epiphanies and how something that was accidental and wasn't supposed to happen led to him realizing that this could help him learn more about his subject was absolutely fascinating. The second, well, it's not quite the second half of the book, it's more like the last third, I guess, is him talking about these 7 women that he was able to trace the ancestry of every living person in Europe back to. And he kind of puts like them in a timeline, showing you how long ago they lived and what their life would have been like. This bit was less interesting than I thought it would be, simply because he went a little too in depth about like hunting practices and stuff than I maybe would have cared about, but it was still kind of cool that he showed you, like, it was a demonstration of just how ancient a people Europeans are descended from. Reading the negative reviews of this book was pretty funny, I'm not gonna lie to you, because there was one guy who was so pissed off that in Bryan Sykes' like brief description of DNA and how it came to be on page like 26, okay, he didn't mention Rosalind Franklin, and yes, she had a great deal to do with that, but when you're putting the entire history of DNA into one page, you basically hit Watson and Crick, who won the Nobel for it, and the brief explanation of how it was found and why it's important. Like, he didn't go into a history of the discovery of DNA, so I'm not sure he really needed to necessarily mention all the other people. Like, I get why he narrowed it down the way that he did. And then there was somebody who was mad that Lucy wasn't mentioned, and I was like, Lucy was an ancient, like, ancestor of humankind that was found in Ethiopia, so she doesn't have anything to do with European ancestry. It was just, I don't think people quite knew what they were getting into. That being said, there are a few things I found that were a little bit outdated, because this was released in, I think, the year either 2000 or 2001, but by and large, it was an excellent read. Okay, into my 3.75 stars, and incidentally, both of these are e-arcs that I managed to get early from NetGalley, so thank you to NetGalley and the various publishers for allowing me a chance to read these books early. First up, we have Slewfoot, A Tale of Bewitchery by Brom. This was so interesting. Oh my god. Okay, so this is horror, and there are bits of it that are truly horrifying. So if horror is not your thing, if you're a little bit of a chicken, that's okay, but don't read this book. So our main character here is Abatha, and she's from England, but her father more or less sold her into an arranged marriage, and she is sent to America to live with this Puritan man in his Puritan colony. Abatha wasn't raised Puritan, not by a long shot, and she does not fit in. I'm not even sure she wants to fit in, and that's fine. You do you, girl. Anyway, shortly after she gets there, well, it's actually like a year or two, whatever, her husband dies unexpectedly, and his brother is not a great person, and he's always been able to manipulate Abatha's husband, and she had finally reached a point where she was helping him learn to stand up for himself and his rights and what's his. But then he dies, and the brother thinks he's just going to swoop in and take all the stuff and leave Abatha high and dry. And she says nay nay. Anyway, that's our one perspective. We have another perspective that's like the fairy folk, the woodland creatures, however you want to put that. And they have awakened somebody. I'm still not totally clear on what exactly this creature is, but the book calls him Slewfoot. And it's just very fun to watch these Puritan people in the town who have given Abatha so much grief really learn to fear. Anyway, the ending was the best ending that it could have possibly been, and I was thrilled with that. It did kind of take off to a slow start. I didn't necessarily need some of the sections, the various points of view, but overall, not a bad read. My other 3.75 star read was Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Doerr. I will leave a link to my review, because I enjoyed this book. I did like a makeup look based on the cover. It was a lot of fun. So if you want to hear more about my thoughts on that, you can go check that out. A brief synopsis: we are following people spanning time from 14-something in Constantinople to the future on a interstellar starship called the Argos. And each of these timelines, there's 3 of them roughly, they are all kind of connected by the fact that the people whose points of view we're following have come into contact with the story of Aethon. Aethon was a shepherd who wanted to be a bird so he could fly to a utopian paradise in the sky called Cloud Cuckoo Land. Very interesting, very unique. I enjoyed it a lot, so link will be in the description box and then in the cards. I think in the review I said I gave it 4 stars. Technically I gave it 3.75, but because of how certain websites don't allow you to do point anything ratings, I rounded up to 4 stars on Goodreads and on NetGalley, And so, like, that was what was in my head when I was talking. But anyway, moving on. I have a book that was 3.25 stars, and this is Rock, Paper, Scissors by Alice Feeney. This is a thriller that just recently released. It deals with Mr. and Mrs. Wright, whose marriage is very, very wrong. And the husband has a condition, I don't remember the actual term for it, but basically it's face blindness. And I didn't know this was a real thing. I had to do some research because I was not convinced, but my God, it is a thing. Basically, he can't recognize facial features. So, like, he knows it's his wife because of the way she smells, the way her hair looks, the way she stands, but he doesn't recognize faces. And that was a really intriguing premise. However, there were a lot of things in here that you really had to stretch to believe, like, a lot. But there was a lot of, like, twists and turns, so depending on how you feel about believability in thrillers will depend on how you feel about this book. Okay, so the next one I gave 3 stars to. Don't hate me, please. So many people love this book, and that's fine. You're allowed to. It just, I don't know if it was just the hype was too much, and so it disappointed me, or what the deal was, but the book in question here is The House in the Cerulean State by T.J. Klune. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know people love it because it's charming and heartwarming, and yes, it is those things, but it's also boring. So boring. Like, there were full sections in chapters that I just skipped because I was tired of slogging through the nothing that was happening, and by the time I got to the end, it didn't matter. I wasn't lost. I knew exactly what was happening. There was no struggle at all. I wasn't confused about anything. I was like, yep, I knew that was going to be how it ended. And that was that. So, I don't know. It definitely just not for me. As far as, like, the little bit of controversy that happened with this book, essentially, T.J. Klune said that his inspiration for this book was the, boarding schools that Native American children were forced into in order to try and force them to assimilate into European culture. And I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about this because the way people describe this book is that it's very fluffy. I didn't find it to be exceptionally fluffy. I think it was more supposed to be like a tribute to those who went through that horrible time and the horrible events. Where I think perhaps T.J. Klune went wrong is there should have been some kind of author's note explaining the inspiration behind the book and maybe giving you some information as to where you can go to learn more, rather than just not acknowledge that inspiration. That's what I personally think. So you're going to have to decide for yourself how you feel about that. Moving on. 2 stars. There's only one. How the Irish Saved Civilization. The Untold Story of Ireland's Heroic Role from the Fall of Rome to the Rise of Medieval Europe by Thomas Cahill. This disappointed me so much because that title promises the world. Oh my God, that title promises so much. But you know what this actually was? I'll just give you what I gathered from the book, which one was boring, so boring. Basically, St. Patrick came to the Irish, and because of him, they learned to write, and that saved the world. That's what I took away from it. It was basically him preaching for, I don't know, however long the audiobook was, 6 hours, about how Christianity was such an excellent thing to be brought to the Celts, and without it, civilization wouldn't exist. No, this was not good. This was not good. There were some interesting historical bits, which is why it got even 2 stars for me. But oh my God, I've never been so bored and frustrated in my entire life. I felt like I was being preached at for 6 hours about St. Patrick. Okay. We're going to end on actually a high note. I didn't rate this book because it's middle grade and I don't feel like I am the audience. Therefore, I don't know if my thoughts and feelings are actually valid. But this is Amari and the Night Brothers by B.B. Alston. Oh my God, what a charming book. Amari is a little black girl and she goes to school at, she's a scholarship kid because it's a more prestigious institution, and she couldn't afford to go there because her mom's a single mother working, I believe, as a nurse. And the kids there give her a very hard time. It's a lot of, like, racial things. Her brother also went there, but her brother, who's quite a bit older than her, has recently gone missing. Anyway, Amari ends up getting suspended from the school. She loses her scholarship because she can't take these girls tormenting her anymore. And she stands up for herself, and maybe she didn't go about it in the right way, but she's also like 12, so cut her some slack, but whatever. Anyway, nobody believes that her brother was a good guy who had a good job. The police don't believe that. They more or less have told them that they're not going to look for him because they think that he just, like, got into drugs or something as a way to try and help his mother out, and that's why he disappeared. Like, that's the basics. Amari, however, ends up getting invited to go to this summer camp that her brother used to go to when he was in school. And she finds out that the supernatural world does exist, and there's kind of like a CIA type of entity that tries to protect the average population from supernatural events. And oh my god, it was so cute. Like, the friendships that Amari makes and, like, the way things go down. Absolutely beautiful. If you read middle grade at all, definitely put this one on your TBR. Okay. I've been talking for a very long time. My throat is very parched. So I'm gonna go, but let me know in the comment section what your favorite read and your least favorite read of September were. Or if you only have good things that you've read, just go ahead and gush about them. I'd love hearing it. Thank you for watching. I hope to see you soon. Bye.